in terms of children, we're given a D- on physical activity standards compared to the rest of the world.
G'day, and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with Professor Narelle Eather from the University of Newcastle about fitness and movement. Professor Eather is an active researcher and accomplished sportswoman with a special interest in improving children's physical fitness. Professor Eather focuses on the promotion of physical activity through educational means, as well as promoting fitness in adults strapped of time because of work. In this episode, Professor Eather talks about how much movement we should be getting in our day, the challenges in getting more fitness into the lives of children and youth, and how good fitness leads to a happy, full life. Hello, Narelle, and welcome to Wellbeing.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Why is it important we get movement into our day?
Well, any type of physical activity or movement, whether it just be general incidental physical activity or exercise or participating in leisure or sports, contributes to your overall health and well-being. And we know that the more you move, the better your health outcomes are. And particularly in the research we're doing here at the University of Newcastle, we know that short bursts of higher intensity activity can be even more beneficial for your health. And if we don't reach those minimum levels of movement or physical activity that are recommended for each day, then we're looking at contribution to negative health outcomes and a greater likelihood of developing chronic diseases.
How does movement affect the body? Like, what does it do when we're moving? How does it affect our internal body?
Yeah, I suppose sometimes people often think that physical activity is all about the physical, but there's so many different types of health outcomes or aspects of our body that are impacted by movement. So, of course, we have, the heart and lungs are working to bring blood around the body and use our muscles and strengthen our bones. So as much activity we can do, the better it is for those physiological benefits. But then we also know that physical activity has significantly positive impact on our mental health, and also new evidence suggests that it also on our cognitive health, so helps our brain work better. You find that once you exercise and then go to do a task that uses your brain, executive function and cognitive tasks, that we actually perform better immediately after doing physical activity. So if we want to do well at school or at work or just be focused at whatever we're doing, we also know that physical activity, even in short bursts during the day, whether it be at lunchtime or in the morning, can help those things as well. And especially those physical activities where you engage with groups of people, such as team sport, they're even more beneficial for health in terms of social emotional health. Yes, I suppose there's so many things that physical activity can impact on, but it's the culmination of all of those things that contribute to a person's overall health and well-being.
So would you say that there's a direct connection between physical activity and good mental health?
Definitely. There's lots of evidence coming out, different aspects of mental health. It's a really broad, area of health. We're looking at things like depressive symptoms, anxiety, self-esteem and general self-concept, how we feel about ourselves, and then actually our emotional regulation. Things like that are all affected by the amount of physical activity we do. So people who aren't doing the minimum amount of physical activity will see that those mental health outcomes can be affected. The other, on the flip side, I suppose, is that physical activity can also help people with those symptoms to manage symptoms, to manage their everyday mental health through physical activity outlets.
What should the average adult be looking at in terms of how much they should be exercising?
In general, we recommend that, World Health Organization and national bodies recommend that the adults try and do at least 30 minutes a day. And where possible, we encourage that people do some vigorous activity. All our work on high-intensity interval training is one way to show that type of activity is even more beneficial. But 30 minutes a day where you can get out and about and get the heart rate up, huffing and puffing, whether it be a power walk, walking the dog, riding a bike, general activity, but then also encouraging people to do some strength training, which is very helpful for bone health for adults. So a couple of times a week, trying to get some strength training and muscle bone strengthening activity on top of that is also beneficial. So getting to the gym, even just some body weight type exercises where you're actually using your muscles more than just a general walk.
So we touched on what we should be getting, but how much are we really getting?
You don't want to know. Honestly, for children, less than 20% of children are doing enough physical activity, and they're the ones that usually get the most activity. Their recommendations are higher for children, so their recommendation is for 60 minutes per day plus 3 times a week, that vigorous activity and muscle and strengthening activity. For adults, it's only 30 minutes. We're finding that between 40 to 60% of adults are not doing enough physical activity just for general minimum health recommendations.
With that average of what people are doing, the amount of physical activity people are doing, how is that affecting the average person in their internal body and their mental health, do you think?
Well, I think that's why, one of the attributes for why we're seeing a rise in mental health illnesses. We've got lots of people, especially in adulthood, are overweight and obese. So all those things that are affected by physical activity are then increasing the likelihood of getting other chronic diseases like heart disease, some types of cancers, diabetes, osteoporosis. All those are affected by lack of physical activity. So those people who aren't doing the minimum doses of physical activity each day are putting themselves at greater risk. So in Australia and around the world, we're seeing higher incidences of those chronic diseases, which could be accounted for in part by the lack of physical activity, especially now that a lot of jobs are really sedentary. Lots of people sit in an office chair or a computer for 8-10 hours a day. So sitting down activities and taking up most of your day doing those sedentary type activities are also impacting our health. But the good news is that you can counteract those sitting or stationary activities that you might be faced with each day in your work environment by doing high-intensity activity. So if you can't fit in a big, long walk or a workout, even getting 10 minutes of high-intensity interval training or exercise that gets your heart rate above the 80% of your maximum can counteract the detrimental effects of sitting down or having a sedentary lifestyle.
And it sounds like in a lot of ways, Narelle, that it's harder to get natural movement into the day now with like newer technologies. Like, for example, we, say 50 years ago, we had to, actually walk down to the library and to get a book, or we had to, walk down to the record store. But those things, we don't have to do those things anymore. So it seems as though it's hard to get natural movement into the day.
I actually agree with you, and it's hard, and I think the actual concept of doing physical activity is quite hard. It's a choice, and it's a choice that you have to force yourself to make in most instances. So if you have to go and get milk or bread from the shop, it's easy to jump in the car. Can you walk there? Can you ride your bike there? It's harder. You have to put your exercise clothes on, or maybe your joggers on. It might make you a little hot and sweaty, or it might be not as easy to carry the bags. But it's lifestyle today makes those choices harder, and it's about helping people recognise that the decision to do this activity has more benefits than not. So that hard choice sometimes is about making that choice because you already understand the benefit. There's lots of people who drive to work every day. Is there a way you could drive some of the way and then walk the rest, or just to get that activity at lunchtime, do we have to sit down and eat our lunch? Can you be out walking, talking, interacting and moving while you're having your lunch break? So I think that, yes, it is a hard decision, and exercise and physical activity can be hard. It's harder than not doing it. But then once you do it, you've had the feeling that you get after physical activity or having been moved or doing a good workout, it outweighs it all. So it's just about encouraging people to make that hard choice and fitting it into your day. And there's lots of, I suppose, people who are busy, people with children, they work long hours, but about prioritising that, whether it only be 10 minutes or 30 minutes, to say, no, this is a time where I can fit it in and make it a scheduled priority. And once you get that routine, people find it easier to do it. And then they actually miss doing physical activity if they miss one of those scheduled appointments. That it's when we don't schedule it in, or we always think that we don't have enough time. And it is a legitimate excuse, but it's also an excuse that we don't have time to fit in a 10-minute exercise routine. It's doable, and even 30 minutes a day is doable if you put it at the top of your list.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Professor Narelle Eather from the University of Newcastle, where we are discussing fitness and movement. We touched on that when people do exercise that they can feel really good. Are there any particular hormones that are released when someone does do exercise that makes them feel good?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of things that go on inside the body that are triggered by physical activity. Those endorphins that make you feel really good about yourself are triggered as soon as you do some exercise. And the research is showing that even after you finish exercise, those feelings, the high feelings, the affective or emotional responses that you get from doing exercise are long-lasting. So you can feel good for the rest of the day and up to 24 hours later just by being active. So having people do physical activity so that they then do feel good is a priority, because if you forget that you can get that feeling afterward and how good you do feel after a workout, it's easy not to do the physical activity or make the choice not to do it. But those the feelings that you get from the adrenaline and endorphins running through your body are amazing, and that's what can make you feel good about yourself, and then you can take on different challenges in your life because you do feel good about yourself.
If someone in the younger years, say, 0 to 5 years of age, don't get very much physical activity, can that affect their development at all?
Definitely. The more we have that early years, the infants and under 5 preschool age group move, the better it is for their overall health, their physical development and their skill development. One of the high priorities with that age group is active free play, but also developing those fundamental movement skills that are necessary to be competent in movement. So if they're not moving or performing skills that they need later in life, for example, kicking and throwing and skipping and running, all those fundamental movement skills, if they don't develop them early, it actually puts them at a back step being able to participate in physical activity later in their life, and not just general physical activity, but sports participation, leisure activities. So we're finding that a lot of children, actually a large proportion of our children, are finishing primary school even at 12 years old, incapable of catching, kicking and throwing. Got a large proportion, especially girls, finishing primary school and going to secondary school who can't do those basic fundamental movement skills that are required for lifelong physical activity. So if we can start early with the preschoolers and getting them active and actually having some structured and unstructured play where they get to move and develop those skills needed for physical activity, then they can then draw from that for the rest of their life. Yeah,
so getting that movement in those early years can really even affect people into their adult life.
Definitely. Those skills required for moving competently impact on physical activity throughout the whole life, and also about your attitudes to physical activity. So if you haven't got the skills to catch, kick and throw, for example, it's really difficult to sign up to play a sport where there's catching, kicking and throwing. You don't feel confident when you're in there. You're incapable of probably performing the skills well, so then you don't feel good about yourself, so then it's turn off from physical activity and sport from then after. So if we can have kids who at least have those fundamental movement skills down pat, and that will give them the confidence then to find activities they actually want to and enjoy be participating in.
Obesity rates have risen in recent years. Has this occurred because of a lack of physical activity?
It's a combination of a whole multitude of things. So the obesity epidemic, it comes down to, yes, lack of physical activity, but you also have the types of food, nutrition that people have now. So we have a different diet than we had 20, 30, 40 years ago. But then we also have all the different types of technology that changes what we do every day, especially in the workplace, travel. So all those things interact together to impact on obesity. So it's not just physical activity, but that is a large factor that plays on obesity levels, but it's also those other factors that we need to consider as well.
If an adult doesn't get that fundamental movement during their adult years before they kind of get elderly, can that affect their lifespan when they get older?
I would assume so. So if you haven't done the physical activity because you weren't skilled as a young child, or it might have minimised your capacity to undertake different types of skills. For example, elderly people who haven't done any strength training because, one, they may not have had the access or knowledge how to do it, but they didn't have the skills, then they're greatly impacted by their mobility as they get older, and that can affect your lifespan or your quality of life as you get older if you're unable to be mobile, support yourself. Little things like being able to carry your shopping in or your washing, and because you're not strong enough, if you haven't continued to do that physical activity and strength training all the way through into the elder years. That's one of the reasons why we have a bit of a focus now in adolescence on teaching them skills in terms of weight training or strength training, even if it's body weight strength training, or even getting some basic equipment into their daily routine, because they need to be able to maintain their strength through their adult life so that they do maintain their capacity to live a healthy life where they're mobile and they can do all the things that they want to do, given that your strength declines considerably every decade as you age.
We touched on how Australia's kind of doing when it comes to physical activity, but are there any parts of the world where Australia can kind of look to that are doing really well with physical activity?
Yeah, we're actually one of the lower countries. There's a large number of countries who rank well above us on the physical activity. In terms of children, we're given a D- on physical activity standards compared to the rest of the world. Interestingly, is that we're considered a sporting nation. Australia loves their sports. When people think of Australia, think, they're really athletics. They've got lots of sports. They do well in sports for a small country. But our children actually rate as a D-, where A obviously is the top compared to other countries. So probably looking to those many countries who sit way above Australia, and looking at what they're doing with their children to encourage physical activities.
Are there any countries that come to your mind that are ranking higher than us?
Yes, like the Norwegian countries, they do quite well in physical activity.
What are they doing differently then? Why are they ranking better than us? What do we need to do?
There's a number of countries out there who have I suppose they got on the front step, and they're enforcing those physical activity recommendations in school time as well. In Australia, or specifically in New South Wales, we have mandatory physical activity mandated times for our kids, so it's 150 minutes per week in schools. But whether schools are actually providing that opportunity or not is not really regulated. So if we have children in schools who are active daily, and that is encouraged, supported, and probably monitored more so, then we can have children get to 60 minutes a day. They spend up to 60 minutes a day in break time. So if they can spend those break times in active play, they're actually well on the way to meeting those guidelines. Then they've got physical education, sport, and other intercurricular activities that can be active. But we have to make sure that schools are supported in putting in policies and practices and having equipment, and teachers who are confident to promote physical activity in school time. And I think that can go a long way to helping our kids get that 60 minutes a day, and then helping parents find avenues that suit their family and are accessible to families who may not be able to afford team sports, for example. Having those opportunities available in communities for free would go well on the way to helping Australia boost those physical activity levels.
Are we doing a good job in Australia at educating kids about healthy habits and about movement?
That's a good question. Well, from my point of view, we know that the physical activities levels we've got physical education curriculums, we have policies, but our kids continue to be inactive. So obviously there's some breakdown in the schedule here, or in the pipeline of the kids or the people around the children who need to support them to be physical activity, may not prioritise it or have the skills, understanding or support to be able to make sure that becomes something that's a priority. I know in schools, for example, I'm not putting everything back onto schools, but schools are foundational for physical activity, given that children are at school 6 to 7 hours a day for 5 days a week. So they spend most of their time at school. So it's a prime opportunity to teach them about being physical activity and providing them those opportunities to be active. But I suppose there's something breaking down in that pipeline that's stopping our children from meeting those guidelines. And I think if we can support school teachers and schools through the Department of Education or the government, or us as researchers, we're continually trying to find new and novel ways to engage schools in physical activity promotion. If we can make that a priority, then I think we can go a step better and help the kids. But schools are so busy, the teachers are busy, they've got so many things that they have to do today in that small amount of time that they have the kids. So getting that physical activity and the education around physical activity to be a priority when there are other priorities in schools, I suppose is the thing that we need to look towards to know, there are lots of different priorities. We don't squash one to the other. And often that's the case in schools is they run out of time, so we won't do the PE or the sport or training. Things come up, and often it's the physical education that's left behind. Where, to me, all our research at the minute is showing that physical activity and high-quality physical education can actually lead to better academic outcomes in the other subjects. So not pushing them aside, but reinforcing that quality PE and physical activity in schools can actually benefit your English and your numeracy and your science courses, rather than we have to get the kids to do really well in these, and we'll leave that aside we'll get to that if we've got time. So I think that's probably one step that we can look towards achieving in making that a priority for everyone in the school system.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Professor Narelle Eather from the University of Newcastle, where we are discussing fitness and movement.
I think those are some really good points you brought up there, Narelle. I think, we've got the policies in place. We do have some of the education in place. And I guess, why do you think with all those things in place, why do you think the kids aren't getting out there, even though they know it's good for them? They know that it will, it's good for them going further in life in their adulthood. Why do you think they don't go out there and do it?
I think there's too many exciting other options for kids today that are quite enticing. And physical activity, once you get out there and you realise how fun it is, and free play and being creative outdoors, playing sport, going for bushwalks, riding bike is exciting. But when you have devices or you've got exciting games or Snapchat or different priorities, sometimes that choice is the harder one. To be active is actually probably the harder one to make at the time, but once you're out there, they probably realise how good it makes them feel. But when you're sitting there and you have a choice, and there's something in your hand or something on TV, Xbox can just switch on. Sometimes that's the easy choice. So I think it's about getting kids to realise that it might be a little bit harder choice at the time, but the benefits outweigh. There's a balance. You can have both. You can do those things and those things. It's just minimising the time on screen. For example, the screen time recommendations are that the children try to minimise their screen use to under 2 hours per day. If you have kids sitting there watching TV or playing Xbox games for 3, 4, 5 hours straight, but maybe limiting their time and getting educated, like you can play that for this amount of time or do those things. But we need to also prioritise that and fit that in as well. So if you can balance the two, it might help us. Maybe the message is wrong. Maybe the message should be more about the balance rather than you should be doing that instead of that. So I think teaching kids to maybe schedule time a little better and, balance the things that they love to do and are exciting and stimulating for that, the screens and the games and those sorts of things, but then saying, well, if you can do those, then you can do those as well. But then I do a fair bit of research in sports, community sports, organised sports and sports coaching. And we have to also make sure that the experience they get when they're doing physical activities or playing sport is a fun and positive experience, because if they choose to go to sport, for example, and then it's a negative experience for them, then they just go back to do the inactive or sedentary activities. So then targeting the activities in our community that are available to make sure that they do hit what kids want to do, what kids think are fun, that they get to socialise with new people, learn new skills and, be supported in doing so. We find that in some types of community sport, the kids go to sport and it can be negative. The coach is yelling a lot, it's really intense, the activities are boring, and it's all about winning the competition. And for some very few children that might be enticing, but for many children, going to sport is about just interacting with other people their age, being active, learning skills, and it's a bit of a social outlet as well as the physical activity. So having those opportunities and considering those aspects of the physical activity opportunities and sport opportunities is really important to not turn kids off.
And it seems like from all we've talked about, Narelle, that physical activity and getting out there and getting movement in your day isn't just, it's a whole of life kind of thing.
Yeah, I think our life, we just have to have a look at our life from infancy through to adulthood, we just have to make physical activity something that's routine, that's prioritised every week. And it's not about you have to do something every day and it has to be it's just about scheduling it in. So on the weekends when you've got the day off, saying, right, we've got a few hours off, let's go for a bushwalk or a ride, or get outside and get out of the house and do something where we're moving. Let's go and explore somewhere new. And if we can do that with our children when they're young, it becomes a normal part of life. I know growing up, my parents were sports people, and it was just normal to me that every weekend we went to sports, and after school we went to sports practice. And for some people who don't like sport, it might be another type of activity. But if we can help our kids pattern that into their lifestyle, it becomes normal and they appreciate it, enjoy it, and continue to do it through their life. So, yeah, it's a lifelong thing, and the choices you make when you're younger and your parents help you make those choices can really affect how you live the rest of your life.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be on the show today, Narelle.
Thanks, Jack. I hope I was able to answer your questions okay.
My guest today was Professor Narelle Eather from the University of Newcastle. Tune in next week where we begin a mini-series talking to Holocaust survivors about the mental health impacts of the Holocaust. And if you like this content, check out the Wellbeing podcast for more. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.